Most people imagined the era of Jesus as purely spiritual. Sandals, sermons, miracles, a world of faith and devotion. But for those actually living there, life was shaped by something far more immediate. Survival, not just survival of the soul, but survival of the body and livelihood. Maniora, more precisely, the crushing absence of it determined who thrived and who sank. The society Jesus entered was one of the most unequal and rigid economies the ancient Mediterranean had ever seen. At the dawn of the 1st century, Judea existed within the vast machinery of the Roman Empire, a system optimized not for integration but for extraction. Territories were absorbed not to benefit the people living there, but to funnel resources to the heart of Rome. Grain, silver, labor, everything moved outward from the provinces to the center. Judea was one such periphery. Unlike the bustling capitals, its economy was fragile, primarily agricultural, and highly susceptible to fluctuations. For most inhabitants, survival depended on barely sufficient plots of land. A single poor harvest didn't mean a lower profit margin. It meant hunger. And Rome had no interest in alleviating it. Authority in Judea was a layered network. Kings like Herod the Great ruled with the blessing of Rome. After his death, Roman prefects, including figures like Pontius Pilate, oversaw governance. Their role was never welfare, development, or justice. Their task was revenue, order, and obedience. Taxes were the lifeblood of this system, and in this there was a harsh truth modern observers often miss. Taxes were not conditional on productivity or profit. They were demanded for mere existence. Land tax, produce tax, poll tax, road tolls, and then religious obligations stacked atop imperial demands. Miss one payment, and consequences were swift and severe. No appeals, no leniency, no bureaucratic safeguards. Tax collection was delegated to local contractors, known as tax farmers. They paid Rome for the right to collect, then pressured the populace to reclaim their upfront investment and generate profit. The design of the system incentivized exploitation. There was no flaw here, only expectation. When a farmer could not pay, borrowing became the only option. Debt, unlike in modern societies, offered no safety net. Bankruptcy, relief, or legal restructuring did not exist. Collateralized land and accruing interest meant one misstep could trigger a multi-year spiral. A failed harvest might force borrowing from wealthy landowners or temple-connected elites. Interest compounded. Debt persisted. Land was seized. The former owner often became a tenant on his own property or descended further into labor, marginalization, or disappearance. This was not accidental. It was systemic. Over generations, small holdings shrank or vanished, giving rise to expansive estates concentrated in the hands of a few. Wealth, influence, and control increasingly clustered around elites tied both to Roman authority and temple administration. The majority of the population sank into perpetual precarity. The economy did not merely produce poverty, it reproduced it, and the state provided no safety net. Families were the first, and often only, buffer. Community charity existed but could not absorb structural failures. Losing land meant losing status, security, and identity. Drought, tax hikes, or an unpaid obligation could wipe out generations of stability. In this world, Jesus was born. It is crucial to emphasize, most people were not impoverished due to laziness, sin, or divine punishment. They were trapped in a system designed to extract wealth from the many to enrich the few. Rome demanded surplus. Local elites demanded rents. The temple demanded revenue. The result, extreme pressure on those with the least room for error. And pressure breeds tension. Judea was never calm. Rebellion, banditry, and unrest were common, fueled not by ideology alone, but by sheer economic desperation. Groups promising relief, justice, or radical change arose amid collapse. Messianic movements found fertile ground not in comfort, but in systemic collapse. To understand why these movements resonated, one must grasp the economic reality embedded in the sermons and teachings of the time. Words like debt forgiveness and release were not poetic abstractions. They were statements of survival. References to the poor did not describe distant others. They described neighbors, families, themselves. Forgiveness, in this context, meant the cancellation of obligations, a chance for reset, a rare escape from the unyielding cycle of debt. The Roman system prioritized efficiency over humanity. Wealth flowed upward with relentless consistency, regardless of suffering. Stability was valued more than fairness. Revenue mattered more than life. Productivity did not guarantee security. Effort did not equal survival. Economic growth benefited the few, while the majority struggled beneath the weight of systemic extraction. Awareness of this inequity was universal. No illusion of fairness persisted. No belief in meritocratic safety existed. The populace endured, resented, and hoped for a reprieve, for change, for any disruption that could break the relentless cycle. Even small acts of moral or social imagination felt revolutionary. Words had power. Behavior had greater impact. By the time Jesus began public ministry, economic strain was acute. The populace was primed. Social fractures were visible. Anger was rational. Desperation palpable. This was not merely background. It was the engine that drove society and shaped receptivity to new ideas. To comprehend the constraints and pressures of Judea, one must also examine the institutions that claimed to protect the people. The temple in Jerusalem was far more than a place of worship. It operated as one of the region's most powerful financial institutions. Pilgrims, priests, and rulers alike interacted with its layered system. On one level, Ito a Sacrede Center, where God's presence was believed to dwell. On another, it functioned as treasury, bank, tax office, and court rolls inseparable from each other. Every adult Jewish male was obligated to pay a yearly temple tax. Enforcement was strict. The tax had to be paid in Tyrian shekels, silver coins with consistent value. Because local or Roman currency was insufficient, pilgrims had to exchange their money, paying fees to money changers. Vendors charged temple-approved rates for animals for sacrifice. Poverty did not exempt anyone. Religious obligations compounded the imperial burden. Temple administration was intertwined with Roman authority. High priests were appointed with Rome's approval, prioritizing stability over merit or popular consent. Moral authority coexisted with extraction. The temple preached holiness and forgiveness, yet reinforced debt, inequality, and exclusion. Access to God, purity, and forgiveness required payment. Charity could help, but was insufficient. Land loss could not be reversed. Debt could not be cancelled. Systemic pressures persisted despite temporary relief. People noticed this contradiction. Resentment toward temple authorities was widespread. Faith endured, but hypocrisy was clear. This context shaped reception of Jesus' teachings. He engaged the system directly. Debt forgiveness, release, and care for the poor were understood economically, personally, and socially. The kingdom of God, as described, implied an alternative order where systemic oppression was not final. Words alone rarely toppled power. Behavior carried consequences. Jesus did not confront Rome directly. He challenged legitimacy, reframed value, and questioned the moral foundations of both Roman extraction and temple complicity. Economic language was central. Debt, wages, laborers, vineyards, creditors, stewards, masters, servants. These were not random metaphors. They reflected daily life and revealed mechanisms of inequality. The temple disruption exemplified this. Jesus overturned the money changers' tables. This was an economic, not merely spiritual, confrontation. A called it a den of robbers. Not because money existed, but because extraction had replaced justice. Prophets, teachers, and critics were tolerated. Systemic instability was not. Large crowds, grievance, and potential rebellion made his act dangerous to the status quo. The conflict was economic and political, not purely theological. Systems could endure suffering and inequality, but not challenges to the moral logic that justified them. By questioning why suffering existed, or whether it was necessary, enforcement of extraction became difficult. Taxes, debt, land loss, religious obligations, and political repression converged. Revolt was inevitable. Rome responded swiftly and decisively. What followed was escalation, not collapse. In 66 CE, open rebellion broke out. By 70 CE, Jerusalem was besieged. The temple, central to religion, politics, and economy, was destroyed. Its treasury looted, priestly hierarchy erased, hundreds of thousands died or were displaced. Rome did not merely suppress dissent, it dismantled the infrastructure of resistance. Yet the moral challenge Jesus presented persisted. Post-destruction, economic systems were reorganized. Taxation intensified, debt persisted, hidden in bureaucracy. The moral narrative that justified extraction faltered, yet material pressures endured. Authority could enforce compliance through force, but belief could not be commanded. Jesus' impact was not military, but moral and social. He undermined the logic that suffering was deserved. Small communities began operating under alternative principles. Mutual aid, shared resources, debt relief, and loyalty based on belief rather than bloodline or status. Systems designed for extraction are durable but not invulnerable. They survive oppression, resentment, and rebellion. Because moral narratives sustain them. They falter when those narratives lose credibility. The economy, society, and institutions of Jesus' time illustrate the interplay of wealth, power, and belief. Understanding this is essential to grasping the historical and moral significance of his life and teachings. And that's the essential insight. Economic systems intertwined with moral authority are remarkably resilient. They endure suffering. They endure injustice. They even survive rebellion. What they cannot withstand is widespread skepticism. The moment people stop believing that hardship is inevitable, deserved, or sanctioned, history may not repeat exactly, but it reveals recurring patterns. And once you recognize how power maintains control not only through force, but through the stories people are taught to believe, it becomes far harder to accept those narratives as natural. If this changed your perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll guide you to them.